movie fans, and fight fans of all ages. Let's get ready to rumble! Introducing first, to my right, with over 1,000 career kills, he's come back to life 7 times. Hailing from Elm Street, the man with the killer right hand, the Springwood slasher, Freddy Krueger. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to my left, his opponent. Over 1,200 kills, 10 times resurrected, and he's got one mean machete. Ladies and gentlemen, from Camp Crystal Lake, introducing the Tower of Power, Jason Voorhees.
How many conversations in the playgrounds, pubs, online forums, and so forth have been spawned by the timeless question, if X and Y got in a fight, who would win? How many scenarios have been played out in the imaginations of fans all over the world, picturing their favorite characters coexisting in the same story world, whether beating the living crap out of one another, doing battle side by side, or getting down to business?
You're slow, you're stupid, and you're all washed up.
Freddy Krueger, 174 3/4 pounds. Freddy Krueger. Jason Voorhees, 275 pounds.
And this brings us to the movie we'll be discussing today. It's got Freddy Krueger, it's got Jason Voorhees, it's got teens getting slashed, it's got a stoner CG goo worm that cracks wise. Yep, it's got that too. It's Freddy vs. Jason, and we're talking all about it. It took over 15 years for it to eventually happen, but in 2003, we finally got to see horror's 2 biggest icons duke it out on screen. This should have happened way back in the 80s, during the prime of both of these characters. But let's just be glad that it eventually did happen. Prior to the film being released, it felt like a presidential campaign. Who were you going to vote for? Legendary boxing announcer Michael Buffer even hosted a promotional weigh-in.
Gentlemen, please, at this time, we would like to have the weigh-in. Could you please step backstage here behind it? Mr. Krueger, Mr. Voorhees, please. Back here, please.
The film is chronologically set after 1991's Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, and 1993's Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. And it is the last film in each franchise before their respective reboots. So, you could say that Freddy vs. Jason was an end of an era of sorts. As previously stated, this film had a long, tenuous road on the way to being made. Consider, New Line Cinema spent $6.8 million, which is more than most of the budgets for all the movies in each respective franchises, to develop 18 different scripts. 18 by more than a dozen screenwriters over 10 years. That's a sign of a concept that's hard to translate to paper, and surely an issue of how to capture the essence of both horror icons in one movie. In one script, we saw Jason Voorhees on trial for his crimes when Freddy is eventually introduced. Another script follows a cult of violent, wayward teens who worship Freddy Krueger. Young punks that wear sweaters and red glasses, burn their skin, and take high-dose sleeping pills to communicate with their idol. The idea was that the cult worked the entire movie to bring Freddy into the real world, and the only way to stop them was to Frankenstein Jason's body back together to stand in his way. And another script saw the fight between Jason and Freddy ending up in a boxing ring in literal Catholic hell. So yeah, executives weren't exactly sure which direction to take this in, but they did what they could. In terms of style and substance, Freddy and Jason cannot be further apart. Friday the 13th's Jason was the result of the success of Halloween. These movies traded suspense for gore while trying to cash in on the sudden slasher craze of the late 70s/early 80s. Freddy came 4 years later and was a preferably original take on the slasher genre. The dream element gave the makers all the freedom they want to create outlandish ways for people to die, whereas most slashers were stuck to use the usual kitchen and garden appliances. Freddy vs. Jason ultimately provided each character with something new. Jason is taken out of his stomping grounds of Crystal Lake and placed into both Springwood, Freddy's old haunt, and the Dream Realm. Freddy is provided with a supernatural opponent for the first time.
From the very beginning, it was the children who gave me my power.
This opus begins in hell, which apparently isn't as full of flames and pitchforks as you may have been led to believe. Freddy, once again played by the great Robert Englund, gives the camera a quick recap of his history, including that the parents on Elm Street have found a way to keep him forgotten in the minds of their children. That means Freddy is stuck in hell, which gives Freddy a frowny face.
I had to search the bowels of hell, but I found someone who'll make them remember.
How will Freddy remind the kids of his evilosity? Obviously, he won't infest the dreams of the dozens of adults who remember him. No, that just wouldn't make any sense. Instead, he tracks down the soul of Jason Voorhees in hell and, disguised as Mama Voorhees, convinces Jason to return to life and do some killing on Elm Street.
Make them remember what fear tastes like!
Interestingly, Jason's hell consists of him murdering promiscuous teens. Is this film taking the daring stance that murderers go to hell and get their own twisted eternal reward? Another interesting point. Apparently, Elm Street and Crystal Lake must be located fairly close together, because Jason seems to walk there rather quickly, unless of course he hitchhiked in between scenes. If so, that should have been included in the extras, because that would have been a fun side adventure.
Hey honey, you got a sister?
Anyways, Jason starts stalking Elm Street, finds some naughty kids, and starts to stab it. The local cops try to keep Mom on their suspicions, but word gets to the kids that some dude named Freddy is the suspect. And so it begins. Most crossovers between horror franchises lean heavily in one direction or the other. The fight between the characters is usually lacking. Even the classic early mashup Frankenstein meets the Wolfman is guilty of this. It's a Wolfman sequel for most of its running time, and the fight is just a blissful few minutes at the end. Freddy vs. Jason takes an interesting approach by centering the bulk of the plot on Freddy. Plot-wise, it's pretty much a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but this is balanced out by giving most of the kills to Jason. In terms of body count, it's a Friday the 13th movie. So, is the movie itself any good? Well, you'd be forgiven for thinking that a movie made in the 2000s featuring two characters whose heyday was the 80s would wind up being a soulless cash grab or maybe a thin nostalgia trip. And there are probably a few people who think one or another or both of those things are true of the final product. What we actually get is a fairly fun trip through both franchises that manages to be fair to both characters and be entertaining. Not an easy needle to thread.
You weren't involved. Son of a bitch.
And the film, though besotten with the trappings of a 2003 horror flick, manages, to the greatest degree that it can, to remain consistent with the 80s entrenched series roots. With that being said, the film still has a fairly singular style. Director Ronny Yu, along with cinematographer Fred Murphy, create an aesthetic that is unlike any film in either franchise, and all of it is filtered through a sense of millennial hyper-realism. This makes for some truly stunning moments, like this scene when Freddy rises from Crystal Lake bathed in an intense crimson light. Visually and tone-wise, the film nails the feel of each icon. Freddy is sarcastic, over the top, and at times maniacally terrible. Jason is unrelenting, brutal, and presented as an unstoppable killing machine he was throughout each of the Friday films. Well, most of them. By the time these two turn on each other, it feels more like Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah than Brain vs. Brawn. It's violent and extremely entertaining.
It's time to put this bad dog to sleep. For good!
Our first bout takes place in the boiler room in Jason's dream. Since they're in the dream world, Freddy clearly has the upper hand, whipping Jason around like he was in a pinball machine. Jason starts the fight by cutting off both of Freddy's arms with his machete, but Freddy just grows them back. fight ends in a ridiculous way with the discovery that Jason is afraid of water. This has always been somewhat of a controversial moment. Never mind all of Jason's prior traipses into Crystal Lake. Freddy vs. Jason stages an 11th hour retcon in a desperate attempt to make the character more sympathetic. Jason didn't have these issues while waiting for a late night skinny dipper in the final Friday, nor did he mind wading in fiery waters for a final confrontation with nemesis Tommy Jarvis in Jason Lives. He spent a decade chained to a rock at the bottom of a lake, and that didn't seem to bother him either. Though, to be fair, in the film, during this nightmare in the dream world, Freddy was deep inside Jason's subconscious, and that's the only place where Jason actually seemed to have a fear of water. And he did drown as a little boy after all, so this reluctantly gets a pass.
Why won't you die?
The film is at its most enjoyable when it simply lets Freddy and Jason engage in a no-holds-barred fight in the real world. The one-on-one battle was undeniably goofy, but it is great fun to watch the stringy, nimble Freddy snake around Jason before plunging his blades into the massive juggernaut's back.
Rise up, Jason! Your work isn't finished! Hear my voice and live again!
A lot of people had problems with the recasting of Kane Hodder in the role of Jason. He'd played the character 4 times over a 14-year period. Fans loved him, but outside the genre, nobody really knew who he was, and the studio ultimately didn't care who was behind the mask. Having said that, replacement Ken Kirzinger did a pretty decent job. The whole situation was above him. It wasn't his decision not to bring Kane back. He was hired to do a job, and he did it to the best of his ability.
Got your nose!
Robert Englund is back and out of control. Though the Freddy vs. Jason makeup is much more demonic in flavor, Englund brings a certain glee and frustration that humanizes Freddy. Jason is similarly humanized with some flashbacks of camp and torment and his affirmation near pitiful phobia of water. So it all comes down to, whose side are you on? But the question really is, how could one prefer the completely taciturn blank slate killing machine that is Jason, when there exists a one-liner dropping, pop culture referencing alternative who released his own pop album in 1987?
Hear the happy feet dancing to the beat of the Freddy.
Per usual with any of these slasher sequels, critics were not kind. But let's be honest, the very premise of this film was predicated on the rabid fans of these franchises, and this movie in and of itself is, for better or worse, just that. Fan service. Although some fans would have liked a few more character tie-ins from previous entries, many thought the film served its ultimate purpose. Bringing these two maniacs together amid the usual silly teen dramatics, we finally get to see them beating the living crap out of each other. Fingers chopped off, eyes gouged, slashes, stabs, and a full-on decapitation. For fans of this type of stuff, this film 100% delivered. The only letdown is the ending. Spoiler alert, nobody really wins. Thanks for watching, guys. So what do you think? Did you see Freddy vs. Jason when it was first released? Has it aged well in your opinion? Are you disappointed we never got a sequel? What other horror icons would you like to see face off? Share your thoughts in the comment section below.